Today, we become legends.
Hey, my name's Inter, welcome back to the channel, and today we are going to be doing a CC tier list for Smite. So we're going to be ranking all the different CC types against each other, hard CCs, soft CCs, everything in the game. And I'm ranking these based on the objective strength of the CC itself, not necessarily on how it's applied in game. So, you know, for example, if there's one CC where like it's not super common CC and the abilities that it's on are really good, I'm not going to take it into account, like, you know, for example, Intoxication. Bacchus Intoxication lasts like 6 or 8 seconds or something. And of course that's really good, but I'm going to go based on the actual like properties of the CC itself, what an Intoxicate does, not necessarily on what a specific ability that has like a really good version of that CC does. Basically, we're going to try and make it a bit more objective. And we're going to go in order of how common the CCs appear in game. A little while back I did a chart that showed how common all of the CC types are in the game, and so we're going to be going based on that order, which means that slows are first. Slows are the most common CC in the game, so I think we'll put slows in the... Are they a B or a C tier? I think for now we'll put them in the B tier, but depending on where we place other things, slows could even move down, because realistically slows aren't that strong. They're very prevalent in the game, and so they might feel stronger than they are because you're often just getting hit with slows like all the time, but slows have DR built into them, so you can never really be slowed more than about 50% or so. Any slows that are like 80% will only actually slow you 50% based on a DR formula that I'll put on screen if anyone's interested. Slows do stack with each other from abilities, but they don't stack with items. So for example, if you have like a Frostbound Hammer slow and then a Gem of Isolation slow on the same target, they're not going to stack, but they do stack with relics. Relic slows don't stack with themselves. Ability slows stack with everything, I think is how it works. So any god ability slow that will stack no matter what. Relic slow will stack no matter what, other than with other relic slows, and then item slows will stack no matter what, but other than with other item slows. And so yeah, there are a few built-in mechanics in the game to make sure slows aren't like completely ridiculously oppressive. You know, you're not going to be able to just hit someone with two 40% slows and they're moving at 80% slow. That's not actually going to be the case. It's going to be more like a 50% slow in that case based on the formula. And so there are some mechanics in the game that kind of hold slows back from being super prevalent. They are really just like they absolutely can get you killed, don't get me wrong, and that's why they're in the B tier. I'm not saying slows are completely useless, but they do get held back a little bit, and they are a soft CC. They're not one of the strongest CCs in the game, absolutely not. And you know what, after that description, I think we're moving slows down to C tier. They're not the worst CC in the game, but they're absolutely far from the best. But moving into the next common CC in the game, which is stuns, I think I'm going to put stuns in A tier. Stuns are the quintessential A tier CC in my opinion. There are some things that are better than them, but there are not many things that are worse than them, to be completely honest. Stuns are just kind of the quintessential CC. They basically stop you from doing everything. They can be very deadly. You know, you get stunned in a late game team fight, you pretty much insta-die from that, and there are a lot of other CCs in the game that are basically stuns, but either better or slightly different, that we'll rank in a little bit. But stuns, by far the most common hard CC in the game. Slows the most common soft CC in the game, and most common in general. A stun is a stun. It's simple, it's effective, it gets the job done, but it does have certain counters like cleanses and immunities and stuff like that. But speaking of those counters, knockups are going to go straight to the S tier. So even with the changes they made to DR fairly recently, knockups are still one of the best CCs in the game, if not the best. And the core simple reason for that is that once they hit, they can't be purified. So if you get hit by a stun, you can just beads that shit and be kind of fine. But if you get hit by a knockup, you have to pre-beads it. As soon as you get hit by it, your beads are not going to do anything. And that's the reason they're better than stuns. You know, if you aren't ready to react in time with that knockup, there is no way you're getting out of it. It's going to hit for the full duration, not affected by DR. That's another big reason knockups are so strong. Yes, they apply 2 DR stacks, whereas something like a stun would only apply 1 DR stack. But that's kind of fine because they don't get affected by DR stacks at all. So you're always going to be hit by the full duration for a knockup, and that's what makes them so much better than stuns. They can't be purified, they're always full duration and not affected by DR or CCR, and that's why they're a tier above stuns. They're simply better. And now you might understand better why I put stuns in A tier. I feel like a lot of people, when they saw me put stuns in A tier, they're like, what the hell, what's better than a stun? It's so good. But there are some CCs that are better than stuns, and knockups are one of them. And another interesting one up next is roots, which are the fourth most common CC in the game. Roots got nerfed pretty hard with the DR changes. They became hard CCs, and so they now apply a DR stack and are affected by DR themselves. Roots got kind of mega nerfed for that reason. Roots for the longest time in Smite were sort of hard CCs, but not hard CCs for the purposes of DR. You know, you had items like Magi's Blessing that specifically said the next hard CC or root. They kind of act like a hard CC anyway because they do completely stop you from doing something, that being a WASD movement. And so they already kind of were hard CCs, but they got away with it and they were classed as soft CCs. But when they changed it, so they're now hard CCs, they're affected by DR, they're significantly worse. You know, everyone's done the play where you R2 a missile and then you go for a root and like your root just lasts for almost no time because it's being DR'd now. And for that reason, I think I'm going to put roots in C tier along with slows. They can be extremely powerful just like slows can be, but they have a lot of counters. The main one just being DR, like they kind of counter themselves in a way by just applying DR and not lasting very long based on DR. And even when they do hit, they're nowhere near as strong as like a stun. They're only going to stop you WASD moving. You can still jump, you can still act, you can still do pretty much everything except WASD move. And so in reality, they're just ever so slightly better than a slow, but not so much better that I would move them up a tier because they are affected by DR and they apply DR. And so that kind of like brings them back down to a slows level basically. Next up, we have pulls and pushes, the 5th most common CC in Smite, which was kind of a surprise to me when I collected this data, to be honest. There's 15 in the game, at least when I recorded this data. This was a couple of years ago. There might be a few more now, but they are the 5th most common CC in Smite. Pulls are decent. I think I would put pulls in like the B tier. They can be very deadly because they can pull you out of position, and positioning in Smite is one of the most important things, especially in late game team fights. You know, if you're out of position, you're probably going to die, and pulls can put you out of position. They are hard CC, they do apply a DR stack, but pulls aren't affected by DR themselves. They're like Knockups, they apply the stacks, but they're not affected by them themselves because of animation jankiness. You know, you can't really have a pull last less time because then it would look really weird on the animation and stuff like that. So pulls not affected by DR, which is a nice bonus for them. They're always going to hit for like the full pull like length, I guess. But ultimately, they just mess with your positioning. They're not going to completely shut you down like a stun or a knockup might, so they're not quite that good. But I would say they are better than slows and roots, so we'll drop them in the B tier for now. Next up is knockbacks, which is often a hard one to distinguish. People think knockup and knockback are the same thing, and to be honest, I don't blame them because high-res use these two phrases interchangeably when they really shouldn't. A lot of abilities say they're a knockback when they're actually a knockup, and a lot of abilities say they're a knockup when they're actually a knockback. They are different. They are very different. Knockbacks, you never leave the ground and they can be purified, whereas with a knockup, once you leave the ground, you can't purify that with beads anymore. Knockbacks are something like Hercules' driving strike, for example. You can always cleanse that knockback at any time and you won't be continuing to get pushed. They're similar to pulls in that way, whereas like knockups, Hercules 2 for example, as soon as that hits you and you leave the ground, you can't purify that anymore. And that makes knockbacks significantly worse than knockups. Also, knockbacks technically don't come with a stun. They often do come with a stun because they're a bit janky if they don't come with a stun, but a good example is Kukulkan's 3 in Rage mode. That doesn't come with a stun, it just pushes them back and then they can immediately act. And so they're not quite as powerful as you would think. It's just that a lot of knockbacks come with a stun attached, like Hercules' driving strike, and so they seem stronger than they are. Knockbacks I'm going to put in the B tier. They are very similar to pulls in terms of they just mess with your positioning, which can absolutely be deadly, but it's nothing quite as good as like a stun or a knockup that completely disables your character. Knockbacks, I'm not sure if they are true hard CCs or not. I think they are true hard CCs in that they apply 2 DR stacks instead of 1 DR stack, just like knockups do, but they can be purified mid-thing, so they're kind of nerfed in that reason. They apply 2 DR stacks, but they don't get the same benefit as knockups in terms of being immune to DR. You know, we've all seen this combo with Hercules 2-1, for example, when they made the DR changes. Earthbreaker, knockup, true hard CC applies 2 stacks. Knockback, true hard CC applies 2 stacks. You're at 4 stacks. That's a maximum of DR, 80% reduction, and the stun at the end of driving strike lasts very little time. So you end up in situations like that where knockbacks can actually screw you over a little bit if you're going to have follow-up or whatever. They're not terrible, but they're not great. Next up, which is actually tied with cripples, at least when I collected this data as this 6th most popular CC in Smite, we have cripples. And for cripples, I think it's a debate whether to put them in B or C tier. I kind of find it hard to justify putting it above slows and roots, but also I think they are maybe ever so slightly better than slows and roots. Definitely better than roots, I would say, because disabling people's movement versus disabling their WSD movement is about the same, I would say. But cripples are soft CCs, and so they're not going to apply any DR stacks, they're not going to be reduced by DR. So if you're applying that cripple, it's going to apply for the full duration no matter what, and that can be very deadly. With how movement-based Smite is, you know, 80% of Smite's gods have a movement ability in some way that can be shut down by a cripple. Some gods are really heavily affected by it. You know, Fenrir, for example, is 1 and is brutalized. Both get crippled out. King Arthur, he gets crippled out of his 2B and both of his 3s with cripples. So they do have some niche applications in terms of destroying gods like general gameplay and damage output. But even just in the case where they're used to stop an enemy getting away, they can be absolutely deadly. And I think I am going to put them in B tier, just slightly above slows and roots. They just have a lot going for them. It's very nice to be able to cripple out people's movement abilities, and the fact that they're not a hard CC is also really nice. They always apply at full duration. They're not going to mess with your other hard CCs in terms of DR stacks and stuff like that. Next up is silences. The what are we on now? 7th? Yeah, the 7th most popular CC in the game. I think silences also go to B tier. They are probably one of the better ones in the B tier, I would say, because completely shutting down abilities, you know, most of Smite's abilities, even if you're an ADC, getting silence sucks. And if you're any kind of ability reliant character, if you're a mage, if you're an ability assassin, if you're a warrior, or anything like that, silences really suck. And so I'm tempted to move them up, but they're definitely not as good as stuns. Maybe I should have had another tier here that I could put silencer in between. We'll think about that, but silences are really nice. They are a hard CC, but they're not a true hard CC, so they're going to apply 1 stack of DR, 20% reduction on any future CCs for 15 seconds. But yeah, completely shutting down ability usage is just really, really good. Yes, they're affected by DR, and so that can sometimes shut down how long you're going to be able to silence people for, but there are a lot of persistent silences in the game, like Nox 2 and stuff, that persistently apply a silence to you, and so they're not going to be affected by DR in that way. But yeah, silences are fundamentally a very average CC, I would say. They can be really good, they can be not so good. I'd say they're a very average, middle of the road CC, so B tier is great for that in my opinion. Next up we have Banishes, which are surprisingly common in the game. Banishes, they can't go any higher than C tier. The question is, are they a D tier CC? I don't think they are, but the thing is they're worse than slows and roots. They're definitely worse than slows and roots. I think I'll drop them in here for now, but yeah, they are on the lower end of the C tier, I would say. Banishes, they are a hard CC, but they're not affected by DR. They're an animation-based CC, and so they're not affected by DR. They're going to apply for the full duration regardless, but yes, they are a hard CC. Any follow-up after they come down from the Banish is going to be reduced slightly. And yes, they can be really nice for taking a key target out of the fight and for setup and stuff like that. You know, Banish into like a big fat Major or something like that can be really good, but I think in general, most CCs are better than Banishes. They're not really ideal. They take the target completely out of the fight so they can't be damaged. You know, it's not like a stun or something like that where they can still be damaged. So yeah, overall, Banishes, not the best. Moving on to Mezmerizers. Mezmerizers are the next most popular CC in the game. They are basically stuns, but worse. I think I'll put them in the B tier for that reason. Mezes, you could maybe even argue for them going down to C tier, considering how easily they can be broken. If the target takes any damage whatsoever, they are completely unmezzed, and so oftentimes abilities that mez come with some additional effect if they wake up early, like Kumbhakana's 3 or whatever, but not all of them do. They can still be really good for interrupting abilities, at which point they're kind of just like a worse version of a silence, and they can be really good for setup as well. Setup is what mezes are mainly used for. Setup or like runaway and space control and stuff like that. You know, Apollo uses this mez very often to just either mez someone and set it up for a teammate, or he mezzes someone and like dashes away or whatever. That's generally what they're good for. They're not super good as like an engage and then dogpile kind of CC, because you're immediately going to unstun them as soon as they wake up from that mez, and then they've also got DR stacks on them, and if you stun them after that, they're going to be taking less stun duration and stuff like that. Yeah, they're basically just a stun, but like significantly worse. You could even argue for them going down here based on how easy they are to break, but they are still like a completely disabling CC, and it feels weird to put a completely disabling CC in the C tier, and so I think we'll leave it in B for now. Next up is Taunts. Not a very popular CC, but one of the most powerful in the game. Taunt goes straight to S tier. They are stuns, but better, similar to Knockups. Their advantages are different to Knockups because, one, they're not a true hard CC, and therefore they don't apply 2 DR stacks, they only apply 1, much like stuns do, and so they're better than Knockups for that reason. But they're also worse than Knockups in the fact that they are affected by DR. They're not an animation-based CC, and so your taunts are going to be affected by future DR stacks. If someone knocks someone up, your taunt is going to last 40% less. But taunts have the major advantage of grouping up and repositioning your enemies. That is the main reason taunts are better than stuns. You know, if you dash in and Athena taunt 2 or 3 people, they're all going to group up right around you waiting for a big follow-up. It makes them significantly better than stuns. I feel like this is a little bit underrated in taunts. Yes, you take some damage, but I feel like, you know, taunts are mostly put on tanks, and they're absolutely worth the trade-off there, that you might take some damage from enemies attacking you while they're taunted to group up the whole team into like a big Scylla ult or like a follow-up CC. You know, maybe you're taunting them and then you knock them all up with like Hercules Earthbreaker or something like that. I'm just coming up with base combos out of my mind here, but yeah, taunts are stuns but better. They're differently better than Knockups are, but I think they are equally deserving of being in the S tier. Tremble probably goes to D tier, to be honest. Tremble is really not that great of a CC. I know Cabrakan got some major buffs just now, and probably everyone's going to complain at me for putting Tremble in D tier because Cabrakan might be bodying them with a 3-second cooldown Tremble, but ultimately, Trembles, they aren't that great. They just give you like slightly less control over your movement. That's kind of all they do. They don't really disable you in particular. You could argue they kind of disable your WASD movement in a similar way to a root, but they are just roots but worse, because you can still move. You're still a little bit hard to hit because you're moving quite erratically, but you do lose a bit of control of your WSD movement. They are soft CCs, so they're not going to apply DR, which makes them slightly better than roots in that way, I guess, but I don't think better enough to move them up to C tier. Tremble is overall pretty unimpactful, and it's often thrown on there as like an additional CC. You know, for example, Cabrakan already has 2 stuns and a wall in his kit, and like Kukulkan already has like a big AoE knock-up and like a push and a root in his kit, and his Rage Form ultimate just trembles them in addition to that. It's often just thrown in there. It's generally not what you're playing the god for. It's just a nice little extra thing, and it's not a great CC. Next up, we have Disarms, which I think Disarms... Ooh, Disarm's a tough one. I think I'm going to put it in the C tier, mainly because it's not super widely applicable. Disarms, when they're good, are really good. You know, against an ADC, against a Bakasura, against a Mercury, they can completely shut down their damage output, and they can be really, really good when they're good. The problem is, unlike, you know, a Cripple, for example, where most of the gods in the game have some kind of movement ability, or a Silence, where every god in the game has abilities they want to use, Disarms aren't quite as impactful, because yes, every god can basic attack, but if you're disarming any tank, any ability, maybe ability-based assassins, you could argue it has some merit on because of AA cancels and stuff, but if you're disarming a tank or an ability mage, you're really not doing anything with that. And so, yes, you can say, just save your disarm, put it on the ADC, and it's still really good, and that is true, but they are just a little bit situational and not useful in every situation, whereas like a Silence and a Cripple, they're useful in way more situations than a disarm would be, and usable in way more matchups and stuff like that, so I think they're definitely significantly better. Next up, we have Fears, which I think... Fear is a tough one. It's either A or S tier, and it's kind of debatable. I think I am going to put Fears in the A tier. They are another one of those CCs that are stuns but better. They are slightly better than stuns because not only do you lose complete control of your character, you also like move a little bit. You know, Fears, they often send you in the direction away from what is fearing you. So like Hombat's Totem is going to send you walking off directly away from the totem and stuff like that. And so for that reason, they are slightly better than stuns. You can reposition your enemies a little bit with them, and that's a little bit of an added benefit over a stun, but not by enough that I think it deserves being in an S tier. You know, Knockups, they can't be purified and they have immunity to DR. Taunts, they directly group people up for future follow-up and stuff like that, and you can reposition more actively. Fears, it's a little bit harder to reposition them compared to Taunts, and they don't group enemies up. If anything, they spread them out. And so Fears, they are better than stuns, but I don't think they're so much better that they're worthy of an S tier like Taunts and Knockups are. Blind. I think Blind has to just go straight to the D tier, to be honest. All this really does is, you know, for a very brief second, take away some of your vision. Sometimes it takes it away completely, like a Ra Flashbang, and sometimes it only takes it away partially, like Loki's Decoy Blind, and so they are a little bit inconsistent in how good they are, but I think overall Blind is definitely one of the worst CCs in the game. They're not completely useless by any means, you know, not being able to see what's happening for like a second or two can be really impactful, but I think compared to, you know, having your character completely disabled in some way, like with a Silence or whatever, they're just not quite as good as those. Next up is Intoxication, which I think I might want to put it in C tier, man, but it's kind of... Nah, I think if I have Trembles in D tier, I have to also put Intoxications in D tier. The only reason I was thinking about putting Intoxications higher is because with the recent DR changes, they made Intoxicates no longer hard CCs and they're now soft CCs, and so they don't apply DR and aren't affected by DR. And so that makes them last a lot longer in general. You know, we've all seen this with Bacchus' ult. You know, takes 6 seconds of Intoxication, always. It's not going to be reduced by hard CC DR stacks anymore. You know what? I am going to bump them up one tier. I think they can be really annoying, and they are slightly better than Trembles in that Tremble just like, you can still choose a general direction that you're trying to move while you're in a Tremble, it's just your movement's a bit erratic on your way there, whereas Intoxications, you lose complete control over your movement, you're just moving in random directions and you can't really pick where you want to be moving to, and so Intoxicates are a little bit better than Trembles for that reason. Madness is next up. Madness is a great CC. The question is, does it go to S tier or does it go to A tier? I think it has to go to S tier, to be honest. Again, they are stuns but better. They do the same thing as stuns in terms of completely taking away all agency from the player that you hit them with. They can be purified like a stun can and like a taunt can. The thing that makes Madness better is, one, if you hit multiple people with it, they attack each other, and so that groups them up like a taunt would. In fact, probably groups them up even a little more reliably than a taunt would. And if you're only hitting one person with it, it's just a taunt. They attack you as if it was a taunt normally. So really, Madnesses are just taunts, but slightly better a lot of the time. In terms of the core CC, obviously the abilities that apply Madness versus the abilities abilities that apply taunt might be slightly different, but in terms of the core of how the CC works, Madness is just taunts but better, because if you hit one person, they're taunted to you. If you hit multiple people, they attack each other and group up that way. And of course, that whole time, they are basically stunned. They have no control over their character whatsoever. And so yeah, Madnesses are just stuns but better. I think they deserve to be in the S tier. Next up is Polymorphs, which are an interesting one. So basically, what polymorphs are, you can think of these as disarms, silences, and slows all built into one ability. So they're not quite as good as a stun because you can still move with WASD, but you are silenced, so you're effectively crippled as well. You are disarmed, you can't use any basic attacks, and you are slowed. That's how all polymorphs work in the game, and so they are really good, and I think I'm going to drop them in A tier. They are worse than stuns and fears, but they're definitely better than all the stuff I have down in B tier here. You know, they're not quite as good as stuns because you can still move, but they're definitely better than what we got down here. The combination of a cripple, a silence, and a slow, you know, it's basically two from down here and then one from down here, all rolled into one CC. Polymorphs are really good, but they don't quite take away complete agency from your character like stuns, fears, taunts, madness, and knockups. All 5 of these that are above polymorph on this tier list, they completely take away any agency from your character to do anything. And if you're curious, polymorphs are just regular hard CCs, so they apply 1 stack of DR and they are affected by it. Deafens are next up, which goes straight to the D tier. They might be the worst CC in the game, I think. At least blinds, you know, being able to take away what you can see is much more impactful than being able to take away what you can hear. Sound cues are kind of important, but I'm sure many of you at some point have played Smite with music full blast on your headphones or something, and you have 0 audio cues, and you can still play the game reasonably effectively. You'll play a little bit worse than you would if you had audio cues and stuff like that. Obviously, in specific picks, it's better, you know, if you want to hit like a Loki or whatever, but in general, being able to play without audio, there are literally people that play in GM that are deaf. So, like, you can kind of get a feel for, like, how strong this CC actually is. It makes an impact, but it's probably the least impactful CC in the game. Disorients we'll just do quickly. Disorients, I'm pretty sure there's only 1 in the game, and it's Mercury's Ultimate. It is the same thing as a stun, but you spin around during it, and when you come out of the stun, you're facing a different direction to where you got stunned. Really, it makes no difference. It just messes with your camera angle a little bit. You know, if you were standing facing the enemy team, poking or whatever, and a Merc ults into you, you might end up coming out of the Disorient facing backwards and not towards the enemy team. It can mess with you ever so slightly, but they're basically identical to stuns in a lot of cases. Maybe, you know, the teensiest bit better. Vortexes, I think, also go to the D tier. You could maybe argue for Vortexes being C, but there's a reason Vortexes often come paired with some kind of other CC to stop them getting out of the Vortex. You know, Poseidon's Whirlpool, for example, it also comes with a cripple because you could just very easily jump out of the Vortex. You know, Hades ult is a good example of a pure Vortex, and Hades ult has had many problems in the past for it being very easy to just get out of. You know, it's half the reason it hits ridiculously hard, gives him like 180 of each protections, completely CC immune. Like, the Vortex on Hades ult is just there to, like, make sure you take the damage, basically. And yeah, there's a reason it has a lot of other extra effects, because Vortexes aren't that good. You know, I mentioned this before, but with how much movement is in the game, it is very easy if you don't burn someone's movement ability that if you apply a Vortex to them, they're just going to immediately jump out, and that kind of counters it pretty hard. They're also countered by beads, obviously, but most of these CCs are. Okay, grabs. I think... Do grabs go A tier or S tier? Grabs are weird because they're sort of like not super well defined. You know, a lot of grabs in the game are single target, but not all grabs in the game are single target. But you know, most of them are, like Fenrir's ult or Atlas's 2 and stuff like that. I think they probably do deserve to be in the S tier, given that they are stuns but better, because you can grab them, they can't do anything about it except beads, and you can reposition them basically completely as you want a lot of the time, so they definitely are better than stuns. They might be worse than some of the other stuff in the S tier, especially Knockups. Knockups are probably just the best CC in the game, given their resistance to beads and DR, but yeah, grabs probably do deserve to be above stuns. They are just stuns, but better. And finally, we have 2 of the most obscure CCs in the game. These are only on 2 abilities on specific gods. First up, we have Slippery Surface, which is Skadi's 3. I think we'll put this in C tier. It makes you lose control of your movement for a good while as you slide across the ice, and that can be pretty deadly in certain circumstances. Doesn't stop you from using abilities or basic attacks, but does stop you from jumping, so essentially they are cripples but better. To be honest, I think I can't, in good conscience, put it in C tier when it is just a cripple but better in a certain way. So I think we'll put Slippery Surface, which is the actual name of the CC, by the way, in the B tier. And finally, we have Time Dilation. Olaron's ult is the only effect in the game that does this. It's minimum A tier. It's just a question of whether it's S tier or not. Time Dilation is completely a soft CC, so it's not affected by DR whatsoever and doesn't apply DR whatsoever, which is really nice for it considering how powerful it is. Most soft CCs in the game are weaker than hard CCs, and that's why there's no like DR on them and stuff like that. Obviously, with Oleron's ult, it's applied as a persistent effect, so DR wouldn't matter with it at all, but you know, if they ever do add some kind of future time dilation mechanic where maybe an ability hits someone and they get time dilated for 2 seconds, it would not apply any DR to that or anything like that in the future. And it is a really good effect. You know, it slows down everything. It basically, it doesn't completely disable you from doing anything, but it inhibits you from doing everything, is what this CC does. You know, your animations are slower, your movement's slower, your cast times are slower. I think even your cooldowns are slower. I'm not entirely sure on that one though. You might want to fact check that. It does a lot of different annoying things, basically. It makes everything in the game more annoying to do. And I often find myself beadsing Oleron ult, which is, you know, can't be said for a lot of other soft CCs. It's kind of hard to judge this one because it literally only occurs once in the game. If we had more abilities, like I mentioned, that like maybe you just throw a projectile and if it hits, they're time dilated for 2 seconds, we'd have a little bit more data on like how annoying this CC actually is, because with Oleron ult, it's like, it's rarely used. It's on one character. It's an ultimate. You can walk out of it. You know, it's not like you get it applied to you as a debuff and there's no way you can stop it without beadsing. You know, you can walk out of Oleron ult and stuff like that. You can beads it, obviously. It's difficult. I think for now I'll put it in A tier, but you know, depending on how it might be applied in the future, if we get any other time dilation CCs, I think as a core CC it might be worthy of the S tier. But yeah, that is the complete Smite CC tier list. So we have the S tier: Knockups, Taunts, Magnuses, and Grabs. They are all stuns but better. They have different benefits. You know, Madness and Taunt can group people up. Grab can reposition people really effectively. Knockups are immune to DR. And then down in the D tier, we have some of the least impactful CCs in the game. You know, Trembles just kind of might make you lose a little bit of control of your movement. Blinds are often very short duration and only really take away like one portion of your game. Deafens are practically useless, so we'll just do this to make sure everyone knows that Deafens are the worst CC in the game. They barely do anything. And then Vortexes, they can be very powerful in niche situations, but they're often very, very easy to get out of and are paired with other CCs to compensate for that on certain abilities like Poseidon's 3. But yeah, let me know what you guys think down below. Which CCs do you think are the most powerful? Which ones do annoy you the most? Do let me know down below, and I will catch you guys in another one later on. Have a great day, and peace out, you nerds.